Great, thank you so much indeed, John. It's a real pleasure to be here and to share what we've been doing through Plant Village at Penn State in collaboration with Mercy Corps and then a host of people on the ground in order to tackle this critically important problem of the desert locust. And so it's a problem we're all rather familiar with, but I think it kind of helps to re-see some of these iconic images that we've sort of seen in the news media in the course of 2020. So here we have 14-star hoppers moving up a tree. So desert locusts are this literally biblical species that we've been battling for thousands of years. It's a single species of insect which stretches during breakout years from Mauritania in West Africa all the way to northern India and sometimes even into Nepal. It covers 20% of the world's landmass. Normally, under non-outbreak conditions, it is a solitary insect in the desert areas, as the name implies, moving around in single individuals. But then when conditions occur to promote a large amount of vegetation, then we see outbreak conditions. And what this means is that the conditions are suitable, the numbers increase, and as the numbers increase, the locusts run out of food. And that switches a change in their behavior. It's called a behavioral polyphenism. And they change from being solitary to being what's called gregarious. And it's at that stage they move en masse in large numbers. And some of the videos here, for example, Lake Turkana back in February 2020, or here in Isiolo County in Kenya, where we have literally billions of insects moving over the landscape. And these billions of insects, in one case, there was a swarm which was 40 kilometers wide, and that swarm was going to eat enough food that would feed 80 million people in a single day. So really, really terrifying circumstances to be presented with if you're a smallholder farmer in East Africa, and you can see some of these stills here. And it's not just farmers, of course. It's oftentimes pastoralists who are on the front end of this invasion. And so what we were trying to do was figure out ways in which we could help the desert locust crisis and provide an actionable tool. But before we kind of explain that, let me go back to some of the issues that we have with desert locusts generally. So here's a map showing 26,000 records collected by UN FAO, and FAO is the frontline agency for desert locust monitoring across its entire range from, as I said, West Africa to northern India. And they do this through dedicated officers. They've got the mandate to do surveillance for desert locusts. And here we're looking at a map for 26,000 records collected between 1985 and 2019. And this is a high human resource intensive effort, which also requires a lot of money and funding. And it happens in the frontline country. So there's a dedicated group of individuals who move across the landscape looking for these small outbreaks and trying to coordinate control as soon as possible. And as you notice here are all the historical records, the 26,000 of them, and Kenya didn't have any. This was one or two records in 2007 where they came across the border, but largely it's a country that hasn't seen a major outbreak of desert locusts in about 75 years. And so therefore, they didn't have the frontline agents in order to do the proper surveillance that's required. On the 28th of December 2019, as predicted by FAO, the swarm started to move across from the Ogaden in Ethiopia into Kenya, and then they spread to about 26 counties across the entire country in a very short period of time in early 2020. And it just kind of reflecting back on the information that was coming out of the time through both national, regional, and international newspapers like the Daily Mail, New York Times, etc. There was a lot of doom and gloom and prognosis, which were really quite catastrophic because Kenya was not a country that was used to desert locusts and therefore didn't have trained personnel. And if you look at all these dates as well, they're from early 2020, and that coincides with the WHO declared pandemic on March 11th. And so the desert locust crisis in East Africa was a crisis within a crisis because COVID shut down travel from FAO, for example, in Italy into East Africa. It shut down travel from other countries with more experience into Kenya. And it also shut down travel between different counties within Kenya, even though there was a sort of an ability for Locust officers to move. But generally, COVID made things very, very difficult. And of course, it also made things hugely difficult in terms of the supply chain. So getting a lot of pesticides which were coming in, particularly from China, or also machinery that we needed, such as the sprayers or even airplanes. This was all made much, much more difficult by COVID, as one can imagine. And so Plant Village is a partner of UNFAO through a memorandum of understanding. We're a long-term partner. We organize the fall armyworm tool across over 60 countries. We have another tool in the Middle East for red palm weevil. And because we have used these AI-first platforms with phones on the ground, because we've been well used to working with FAO, they asked us in January if we could do something. So we rapidly developed a desert locust surveillance tool for non-experts, and we worked to deploy crisis teams. So I'll speak about those two elements that Plant Village was able to do early on in this crisis. So the normal model, so here's Keith Kresman, who's a senior locust officer at FAO. The normal model is this surveillance system that relies upon well-trained individuals who are well-resourced and then have the ability to connect with expensive equipment to satellites. So you're in the middle of very remote areas looking for locusts, and you need to get a satellite reading in order to accurately determine where they are. And so we approach this with the mindset, though, that in East Africa, there's two things which are available. One are smartphones, and the other are these boda taxis. So we could get young people out into the field easily, and we could equip them or have them just use their own existing technology or what's available in the community, like these boda taxis, in order to do broader surveillance. So Frank Doyle at Plant Village developed this eLocust 3M app that we developed for FAO, and critically important, it was able to turn a regular smartphone into a tool that would operate in remote locations in northern Kenya or Somalia, Ethiopia, etc., where it could directly connect to satellites. And that's what you can see here. You can see the tool, which is, and the satellite inputs, which are coming down. And so this was really important because historically you would need a very expensive device to directly attach, but now we could just use the ubiquitous smartphone effectively. The other thing that we historically relied upon was deep domain expertise in entomology. So as an entomologist, it takes time to build up this experience, and Keith Kresman has worked for FAO for 30 years. And obviously he and the people he trains are really good at diagnosing the different stages of the desert locust in order to accurately record what's happening. And so we approached the problem by providing pictures to some of our field staff, like Tyson here, who's got this wonderful selfie with a locust, some pictures for Tyson to be able to accurately identify the stages so that the records are as good as they can be. But we went a little bit further than that because we have this experience in artificial intelligence. So what we have on the back end here is the ability to take these images from records created by people like Tyson into the cloud system of Plant Village, and then run a convolutional neural network, an AI program on them in order to accurately diagnose them. This is some work that's really been pioneered by Pete McCloskey and Rohit Gangupantulu, who are both AI engineers at Plant Village. And I can just kind of exit the show and show you this. Hopefully you're still seeing my screen. So this is the live platform that you can see, and here are records that have come in the last couple of days from Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And we can also show records which are just people doing surveys. But this particular record here that you can see that came in today in Somalia, if I just click on the image, and maybe on first glance you think, well, what is this? But if I could zoom in, what you can see is that they're immature stages of the locust. See these little tiny things here? These are hoppers, and that's probably second instar, or even, well, probably second instar hoppers. And so what's possible there is the machine was able to diagnose this accurately. So it's 99% accurate or its confidence is 99% confident that these were indeed hoppers. So the AI tool is able to very, very accurately diagnose the problem, which is phenomenal, because in this case we are massively upscaling the ability of people like Tyson to act on the front line, and then have an ability which is comparable to the experts like Keith. And so this is one of the great things that we've learned from 2020 and the Desert Locust operation, is that technology can bring individuals on par to the expert system that we had historically. So another thing that we've done is get people out into the field who can do these surveillance. So recall in terms of COVID, what the WHO chief said is you cannot fight a fire blindfolded, and this is the same for Locust as it is for COVID. And the approach of Plant Village is to leverage young people in Africa, particularly from the universities, because we're a university. So this is Dr. John Chalal, and this is the Dream Team, which has been set up and now being replicated across Kenya. And we have this system whereby incredibly smart young people from agricultural universities have the job with Plant Village to work with local community members. These are predominantly women, over 80% women, and 100% less than $2.50 a day. And so they do this participatory learning and research and education with these community members. So that was our existing model. And because we had that model, we can transpose it rapidly into these Locust crisis teams. And so this is bringing us back to March and April 2020, when there wasn't a lot of surveillance going on. And these young people across 4 counties in northern Kenya were trained. We had about 62 of them. They would go out and they would look for locusts here. They would engage with community members, and because these young people came from the same community, there was a high trust relationship. So they engaged with the pastoralists across Isiolo, Samburu, Marsabit, Turkana, and elsewhere, and they got local observations, because of course the pastoralists are out there moving across the landscape and have great records on where they're finding the locust. They also used phone calls. Pastoralists are largely illiterate. This is Samburu, for example. 88% of the population is on less than $1.70 a day. So the educational levels are low, but they were able to just call them and get observations. Because they moved on these boda taxis rather than these 4-wheel drives, they could go lots of places that the 4-wheel drives couldn't. And then they made their reports. And the way in which we closed the loop rather nicely was that they were also in real-time communication with the airplanes that would ultimately spray. And so this is a true Internet of Things. We have the phone, the AI, the cloud system, but also closing the loop with guiding the airplanes about where they have to go to more effectively spray. So this was something that was a great benefit of the system, and something that we're really happy to see emerged. So we also wanted to engage a broader community, not just community members in the counties, but also the international community. So what you're looking at here is our Locust board, a GIS, a Geographic Information System platform, that brought together experts at NASA, NOAA. NOAA is critically important because of wind models, which are important. ISRIC, which does soil databases and grow intelligence in the private space. And this was something that we updated daily. We still update daily, and a lot of people find value of it, coming and seeing the benefits. We're able to, for example, look at locusts which are in the egg-laying stage, so the mature females, and then using NASA satellite observations and soil data, determine whether we think the area that we find those locusts is suitable for breeding. Locusts require moist, sandy soil to breed, and we can now remotely determine that. So it's really a great advance to see this great interaction among scientists in the cloud, effectively helping people in real time in East Africa. I'd also kind of draw your attention to the number of observations we've made with the platform since March and April, almost 18,000, and the number of observations made since 1985, almost 25,000 for swarms. And so this is really great. This democratized tool, which is in the hands of young people and scouts across the whole region, is really changing the way in which we can approach and effectively do surveillance. So all of this data which is coming in, of course, is incredibly rich. We can combine it with things like the soil moisture I mentioned, the soil types, lat long, historical records, crop growth, and weather, and work by Dr. Fei Zhang at Penn State and Plant Village, and Derek Moore also at Plant Village at Penn State, have been using machine learning models. So the kind of stuff that's kind of ubiquitous on the web and figuring out how you search or navigate in the city. That sort of technology can be effectively applied to the problem. And this is a map from during the peak of problems in northern Kenya in June. We were in some areas about 90% accurate in determining where we're likely to find locusts based upon these variable data inputs. So again, more data, better predictions, and better understanding, so we're not constantly in crisis mode. One of the effective ways, and John will speak more to this, is to engage a broader community. So we've worked with Shamba Shape Up, which is a very popular TV program by Medea Company in Kenya, reaching about 9 million people a week. And then since that, through actions of Mercy Corps and Elias Nure, who was to be on the call here today, we've really expanded into Ethiopia as well. So we're actually collectively reaching about 15 million farmers a week in East Africa on alerts, showing them what the problems are, showing them pictures, and then also showing this kind of mapping system as well, so everybody can see what's happening on a weekly basis, and then the narrator. And this is a very well trusted mechanism to exchange information. So that's really excellent to see. We were able to reach a broad number of people. And then also asking the community members to text in if they've seen reports. There's some limited knowledge we get with text because it's just characters, but still it helps guide what we want to do and how we might kind of mobilize some people with the more advanced technology, which is a smartphone app. And we're not stopping there. So this is work that one of my students is doing, Edward Amoa, and then this is Melodine Jeptu, who has run the whole crisis team in Kenya. Here we're using these little trackers here, which are now so small we can stick them on the back of locusts and track them. And in some cases we've tracked swarms over 20 kilometers. And this is really, really excellent because as you can imagine, controlling locusts across the entire range of East Africa is very hard. It requires a lot of airplane fuel. It also requires spraying, which oftentimes is sprayed in the wrong place or on a swarm, which is not a large swarm, it's only a small swarm. So if we use these trackers, then we can figure out where's the largest swarms and how can we effectively spray them, and so we get the most bang for our buck, so to speak. So in conclusion, you all know this. You all used technology to get to your current location. We're all using technology now in this presentation. If you're moving around a city, you're being guided by satellites. This technology that guides you in a city can guide surveillance across East Africa, and we've absolutely shown this. So it is has a complete ability to level the playing field, to make young people in Africa comparable with professionals. And the whole model up until now is bring in Europeans or Americans into Africa to be the knowledge experts. And that model absolutely can and should change because technology has leveled the playing field. So that's a really important message that we kind of come to a conclusion. And the other reason is not just because it's equitable and the right thing to do to empower young African scientists to do this, or just young African people. The other reason we should do this is the crowd is bigger, cheaper, and in more places, especially when we consider broad problems like climate change. We have to leverage the crowd, and John will, I'm sure, speak to this in a moment. Many ways, and again, this is what John is going to say. And the other thing I would say is that 2020 is not yet done, although we're all sort of done with 2020, it's not yet done. So we immediately rolled from the crisis of locusts into this La Nina effect. So the short rains in East Africa are well below normal. So we're expecting a lot of stress between now and middle December. And we're also expecting for the long rains in 2021 to be way below normal as well. And so we're taking the approach that we had for locusts and we're transposing that for the pastoralist community. So now we have actually activity across all the northern counties in Kenya for pastoralists. And just to add insult to injury, the locusts are back in Kenya. So this is from the 15th of November, where we see a swarm has moved across from Somalia into Kenya, and we're going to expect more and more of that. So we have massive amounts of activity here, probably undocumented, also in Ethiopia. And so although we have successfully controlled somewhat the problem, it still remains, and it's being compounded by the climate change stress, which is low rains at the moment in East Africa. So with that, I'll conclude and thank an enormous team of people. Melody and Jeptu has done a phenomenal job organizing this across all counties during the time of COVID. Dr. John Chalal, Moy University, also excellent. Annalise Keys, our executive director, who oversaw the whole operation. The 62 Locust team members, who are just really phenomenal. Our engineering team of hoodies, our partners at Mercy Corps, Medea Company, Turn.io, FAO, World Food Programme. Of course, governments are critically important. We really have worked very closely with both Kenya and Ethiopia on this. And then funders, as John mentioned, Skoll Foundation, Schmidt Futures, and then core funding from, Schmidt Futures and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and FAO. So thank you very much.